Good morning, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to day 2 of Digital Manufacturing Week. It's fantastic to see so many of you here, and thank you for all the terrific feedback from yesterday. It's my very great pleasure today to be introducing Jessica Leigh Jones, MBE. Jessica is an engineer, an astrophysicist, and an internationally renowned keynote speaker, and also an alumnus of our 2017 Top 100 People in Manufacturing. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and good morning all. Well, the buzz of the shop floor, the adrenaline that comes with achieving that tight shipping deadline, all of those parts working together in harmony sometimes. There is a magic associated with manufacturing that you can only truly comprehend once you've worked in the industry. So I want to start by introducing you to this character. If I can bring him up, there he is. You all know him, I'm sure. So perhaps slightly controversially, I want to use Two-Face as a means of holding a mirror up to the industry. Because sometimes, inadvertently of course, all of those things that we know and love about manufacturing, all of the things that makes the industry unique, sometimes can give rise to unethical practices. So let's explore the two sides of this. So the UK manufacturing industry employs 2.7 million people. That's around 8% of the UK workforce. In Wales, where I'm from, as you can probably tell, it's actually 11%. It's a big percentage. Now, manufacturing provides accessible employment for local people. That's fantastic. But let's look at the other side of it. Well, unfortunately, sometimes that employment is low skilled, low paid, and whilst many people may progress in their manufacturing careers, sometimes we can experience a low turnover, which can make organisations resistant to change and also culturally homogeneous, i.e. a lack of diversity. The local aspect of this is also quite interesting because manufacturing leaders are often very powerful figures in their local community, both in terms of direct power over the labour market, but also lobbying power with government. And this kind of power, whilst often used, of course, in the right way, can also create opportunities for Machiavellian behaviour. So the manufacturing industry is primarily demand-led, meaning it's susceptible to fluctuations. Is one of the things that makes manufacturing really exciting, you know, achieving some of those deadlines, as we said. But those fluctuations can also lead to fluctuations in the workforce. Sorry about that. Fluctuations in the workforce can mean 0 hours contracts. It can mean agency and temporary workers. And for some of those workers, financial instability and emotional insecurity can be, you know, a major problem for their sort of mental health and well-being. Now, manufacturing companies exist at the intersection of complex supply chains. So you may have heard of a story probably a few years ago now, Zara, the sort of, you know, big retail clothing giant. So there were clothes coming from Turkish factories that Zara was using, and workers within those factories had actually sewn the words help into the clothes. Those workers, it later transpired, were not paid in a lot of cases. They were not given suitable working conditions. You know, there were a number of illegal and unethical practices going on that perhaps Zara didn't even know about. But it's important to understand, you know, the being at the intersection of that supply chain and the responsibilities that come with that. Manufacturers are influenced by technological developments. This was an area in which I worked. I worked on Industry 4. It's an incredibly exciting area. One of the challenges that always gets associated with that is redundancies, for example. Often manufacturing companies, and actually this is particularly true in Wales. In Wales, we went through a phase with the WDA, the Welsh Development Agency, where there was a lot of international inward investment in Wales. And also in other parts of the UK, of course. And so often manufacturing companies are influenced by international parent company cultures. Whilst, you know, I always remember this as being one of the most exciting things about working in manufacturing, you know, being able to experience some of these cultures. sometimes these can stimulate, and it's often down to the implementation of the practices rather than the culture itself. But sometimes these cultures can stimulate unhealthy behaviours, such as working overly long hours, which can lead to errors, safety concerns, and also employee burnout. We talked about the buzz of the shop floor, and there is a need in manufacturing to be physically present. We hold physical inventories, we do physical work. And it's really interesting because whilst many industries have adapted to remote working through this period, it's more difficult for a manufacturing company to do that. Now, again, it's one of the things that makes manufacturing unique is the need to be physically there. But sometimes this can lead to a culture of presenteeism amongst the wider sort of staff and even within the wider supply chain, that expectation that you're going to be there at your desk, not even necessarily adding value in some cases. And we just have to think about how that appears on the flip side. So, for example, does a culture of presenteeism make it difficult for people with child and elder care responsibilities to fully engage with employment? Does it make it difficult for people with disabilities to be able to engage with employment? So it's just something to think about. Equally, one of the great things about manufacturing is the continual improvement, the high standardization, the robust processes. Often these improvements are incremental, and there is a focus on consistency and repeatability, and sometimes that can hinder innovation and impede creativity amongst workers. So just to sort of, open that up as something to think about. These are the things that make our industry unique. These are the things that make our industry exciting, but these are also the things that sometimes give rise to unethical practices and behaviours. So I'm using the term ethics a lot. What do I mean by ethics? I get asked this a lot. Well, ethics is essentially a system of moral principles that govern the behaviours that are considered acceptable and appropriate. Sometimes culture will determine what acceptable and appropriate means, and that can vary between companies, it can vary between countries. But I think there is a broad understanding of what's right and wrong, which is ultimately what we're talking about. And integrity really is the core moral value that underpins ethics. So integrity is about ensuring that organizations and individuals consistently uphold the required ethical behaviors. We all know consistency is important in manufacturing. So what are the benefits of being an ethical manufacturer? Okay, so let's look at, the obvious one. Everyone wants to sort of talk, bottom line and brand and things like that. So brand, it's not just about avoiding a scandal, okay, although, good ethical practices will help you reduce the chance of a scandal, of course. But it's about thinking about the modern consumer. So the modern consumer is a conscious consumer. And actually, research shows that 48% of people have actually boycotted products or services that they deem unethical. Maybe a recent example would be Starbucks, avoiding paying tax, for example. 48% of people would choose not to buy a coffee from Starbucks, for that reason, for that ethical reason. Now, we may think this is a bit of a fad. Ethics is maybe a millennial issue. Maybe it's people of my generation and younger that care about ethics. But actually, this isn't true. Ethics is not a fad. It's a trend. And the evidence actually shows that as wages rise in developed countries and as standards of living improve, more people have disposable income, meaning they can start to think about ethics. Ethics becomes a core part of their decision-making process when they make a purchase. So ethics is here for the long run, which is why it's important for us to start thinking about it now. And maybe it's no surprise that a study of the financial services industry, and we'll talk about the financial services industry quite a bit because there, as you can imagine, there has been a lot of research done in ethics in this area. And a study in the financial services industry found that businesses with high ethical standards and integrity actually financially outperform other businesses by more than 10%, almost 11% within a 5-year period. So it does literally pay to be an ethical business. attracting and retaining a diverse and highly skilled workforce. It might not be a surprise that a study, this is a few years old, albeit so the figures may be slightly out of date, but a study found a few years ago that only 8% of school leavers would consider a career in manufacturing. That's obviously quite disappointing. And furthermore, 56% of millennials, more than half of people sort of 25 and younger, have ruled out ever working for a particular organisation because of its values or its standards of conduct. That's really quite powerful. And it goes back to that idea of, you know, having an employer brand, but we'll talk about that a little more shortly. Increasing employee engagement, why would we want to do that? Well, generally it leads to productivity increases. It also leads to greater creativity amongst the workforce. And so, you know, more engaged employees are more creative, and, you know, there are opportunities stemming from that around diversification of products and services. So just taking that stat that we talked about a second ago, that 10.72% financial performance figure, if every manufacturing company in the UK was to adopt an ethical agenda, then the UK manufacturing sector could be worth 438 billion by 2023, which is, you know, really quite impressive and really quite ambitious. So something that is talked about a lot at the moment is around sort of resilient supply chains, particularly because of this, you know, the sort of ongoing debacle around, you know, COVID-19. Preventing the Zara scenario from arising, you know, taking a stand against unethical practices not only makes you a more ethical manufacturer, but also helps to create a more resilient supply chain by preventing sort of downtime in that supply chain. We often talk about CSR, corporate social responsibility. There is an opportunity for manufacturers at the heart of their communities to contribute and support to the local community as ethical manufacturers. This isn't necessarily about a bolt-on CSR initiative that the HR team manages. This is about viewing the organisation as part of the local community and making decisions in an ethical way that consider the implications on that local community. Okay, so I briefly mentioned financial services. Now, ethics became a major topic within the financial services industry after the global financial crisis. And the reason for that is that one of the major contributing factors in the global financial collapse was financial advisors actually mis-selling financial products and instruments to customers who perhaps didn't understand what they were buying. So, you know, think about the PPI scandal. And in this context, what we're talking about is, you know, professionals abusing their professional knowledge and their position, you know, often to gain commission, for example. So, you know, talking about sort of unethical incentives as well in the financial services industry. So since then, the regulation of the financial services industry has evolved to place ethics at the centre and professional integrity at the core, you know, to prevent similar scandals from occurring. Now, at Younger, we've got more than 20 years combined experience of manufacturing. You know, unfortunately, we've experienced some unethical practices within our industry. And as a result, we have developed a code of ethics for manufacturing organisations in the UK that draws on the best practice from the financial services sector, also from the CIPD, the Professional Body for Human Resources Management, the CMI, and also the Chartered Quality Institute. So it starts with tone from the top. So all about leadership and governance. There are then 5 themes which outline 5 themes which outline several top-level commitments. And the idea is that if you sign up to this code of ethics, you will be accountable to the industry and to the community for your, you know, ethical behaviour. So I'll give you a link at the end of the presentation to find out a little more about this. We are looking for anybody who might be interested in piloting this with us. or maybe sharing their stories and their ethical journey with us so that we can improve the framework. So I'll give you those details at the end. And whatever stage of your ethical journey, you are most welcome to get in touch. So let's look at some of the aspects of what the Code of Ethics is working towards. So the first one, high-performing teams. I think we all agree that this is, something that we would like in our manufacturing business. So, using two-face again, let's sort of look at the two different sides of this. So let's start with what a toxic culture might look like. So these are just signs. These signs can be interpreted in different ways. It's important to remember. So I'm just giving you one aspect of how this might look. So if you see a lack of motivation or anxiety amongst peers, firstly, you have to wonder, have you made, a lot of incompatible hires, or could this be a sign of a fear culture? So people not wanting to step up for fear of getting something wrong, for example. This could be a policy issue. Maybe policies are too restrictive. It could be a leadership issue. There could be one individual or a group of individuals that people are, actually frightened of and afraid to step up for a reason. So it's important to understand, is this one team, is this one department, or is this the entire factory that's behaving in this way? Blame culture and tribal formation. So it's quite stereotypical in manufacturing that we segregate and standardize processes to the point where we throw something over the wall and it becomes the next department's problem. Or we have a shift situation where it's always the afternoon shift's fault. The sort of behaviors that I'm talking about. And again, it's just important to be on top of those behaviors. It is quite natural for humans to identify with groups and to want to protect the interests of the group, but you also have to look at the extent to which that might be damaging the performance of your team and of your organization. Failure to distinguish between work and play. This is a really interesting one. And again, this is really open to interpretation, but it's about blurring of lines, and it's about, often those unwritten expectations. So I'm talking about, an exclusive poker club or a drinking culture, for example. These are the kinds of practices that may preclude, many different types of people, and may also be, for that reason, indirectly discriminatory as well. So people who maybe cannot commit time outside of office hours because they've got childcare or elder care commitments, or because they have, a particular set of beliefs that prevents them from engaging in those activities. You have to ask if your company is doing those sorts of things. Is that the kind of culture that you want to create? And is that the kind of image that you want to give your employees and your customers and your stakeholders? Using HR as a weapon, this is not specific to manufacturing. I think this happens, in virtually every industry. But it's really interesting because, many organizations view the HR department as the team who deal with problem employees. So it's very transactional. I was actually once involved in a business downsizing activity where I was instructed not to educate employees around the implications of 2 years service. Now, essentially what I was being told is that we didn't want employees to know or understand their employment rights. Now that's really quite scary, because that's the kind of behavior that contributed to the global financial collapse, abusing your professional knowledge and essentially selling something to someone or telling something to someone that, they don't know if it's right or wrong because they don't have the same understanding as you. So for me, that one is quite concerning. And finally, and you may sort of laugh at this one, but overuse of the word opportunity. So Jess, I've got an opportunity for you. Yeah, right. Okay, I know what that means. That's manipulation, not always. And I slightly say that when in jest, but just beware of overselling, difficult or undesirable tasks to people. So individually, you may see aspects of these, different things, and, on their own, they may not mean a huge amount, but probably if you have 3 out of 5 of those things, you either need to get out or you need to sort of address what may be a cultural issue and worst case, a toxic culture. So let's look more positively at the other side of things. What does an inclusive culture look like? Well, the first thing is about having clear and visible values. So that may mean physically making those values visible. In a manufacturing environment, maybe not everybody has a PC, they might not have access to the intranet, for example, so you may want to physically present those values. Clear expectations, this is really important from day one. So it's not just the kind of contractual expectations that are in the employment contract, but it's those, how do you expect people to behave? How do you expect people to escalate and report issues? Some of this comes down to making almost a psychological contract with your staff. So line managers to staff having those kind of clear expectations and making sure that those expectations are consistent throughout the organization. A culture of continuous improvement. So the CIPD has found that one of the primary reasons why a person leaves a job is because a lack of career development. People very rarely leave a job because of money. It does happen, but it isn't as common as you might expect. More often, it's because of oh, sorry, I was just reading the presenter chat. I was worried you couldn't hear me then. It's quite strange because there's obviously no sort of feedback on this system. Yeah, sorry. So one of the primary reasons why people would leave a job is because of, either a problem with a manager or because they feel that they have a lack of career development within their current role or within their organization. And so investing in lifelong learning is really, really valuable because naturally it increases organizational capability, it improves employee performance, but it also helps to make your employees more engaged, less of a flight risk, more productive, more likely to be with you for the long term. Transparency. So this is a really interesting one. Think back to the exclusive clubs, think about the blurring of lines. People are highly receptive to contradictory behavior. And I don't think you see this any more than on the shop floor. People are very, very receptive to somebody saying one thing and doing something else. So it's really important that you are, walking the walk as well as sort of talking the talk. So to some degree, this is about clear policies and procedures, people having confidence that the lead in the sort of leadership and corporate governance, and also making sure that people feel comfortable to report and challenge what they deem to be unethical behavior. So this is, maybe a slightly personal view of mine. For me, HR is a strategic function. I think there is huge value in front-loading your efforts into recruitment, for example. So, as we said earlier, a lot of people see HR as the department that deals with the problems, but actually, if you front-load your efforts into recruiting the right kind of people for your business, you're going to have less issues to sort out later on anyway. But also the concept of sort of devolving transactional HR responsibility to your frontline management and then being able to use your HR team to focus on more strategic issues. And as we said, this really comes down to the fundamentals of Maslow's hierarchy. It's making sure people feel safe to question and to exercise creativity in their roles. Okay, so just introducing to you the employee value proposition. Some of the feedback we gave to Welsh Government recently on they're developing a framework for manufacturing in Wales, which is obviously really great. Some of the feedback that we gave to them is to not just focus on fair work, but to also focus on meaningful and empowering work. So think about the employee value proposition, think about how you're engaging your employees, and think about it as a two-way process. You're not just offering them a job with money, they're choosing you as an employer as well. So it's important to kind of create that employer brand. So there's an example there of our own. We've talked about constructive challenge, accommodating your mavericks. You may have people within your organization who really don't fit. That's okay. You need to embrace those people and sometimes maybe think about recruiting based on attitude and aptitude as opposed to experience. Experience is an interesting thing in its own right because if you are requesting 10 years experience in a job description and you don't really need it, there is a risk that you're, inadvertently discriminating against people. So you need to be careful of that one anyway. So try and think about, recruiting based on attitude and aptitude instead. Think about the different programs that you can have to support innovation within the organization. It's very rare that entrepreneurship and manufacturing are spoken about in the same sentence. So this is a real opportunity to, create processes and structures that facilitate, we'd call it intrapreneurship within the organization to make you more innovative and more, give you a competitive advantage longer term. Shared apprenticeship schemes. I'm not sure if these exist in England, actually, but it's a really, really good model that we have in Wales. And there's one that you can look at called the Aspire Shared Apprenticeship Scheme, which is in Blaen y Gwent. And essentially, they're really good for SMEs. So if you have, if you don't maybe have the resources to take on an apprentice, you can actually share an apprentice through your supply chain. So a group of generally non-competing companies get together and share apprentices around the supply chain. And then what you get is the transfer of best practice and the transfer of ideas in a way which doesn't, damage your competitive advantage. It's a really, really good scheme worth looking into. Resilient supply chains, something which, is a hot topic at the moment. I think the main thing from me on this is to think about your procurement procedures, because very often we procure based on capability, capacity, and cost. We don't necessarily think about, the stability of the leadership team. I've seen major procurement contracts come unstuck because people haven't considered, that the chief executive might be in the process of leaving, and then somebody new comes in and doesn't hold the same value over, your relationship, and so things fall apart. Interestingly as well, if your main contact is the chief executive, that becomes a relationship management issue as well. So think about sort of, governance arrangements and the strategy of the organizations who you're engaging with. Following on from that, think about the alignment of your organizational values. So again, we're trying to prevent the kind of Zara scenario from happening again. Fair treatment of customers and suppliers is interesting. I've seen public procurement contracts where it's actually mandated that you have to make a certain percentage profit. And the reason for that is that we want suppliers to be, modestly profitable such that it's sustainable for them to carry on those activities. We don't want them to give you, the lowest possible price and then either engage in unethical practices to achieve that price or to not be able to do that for the long term. So that's quite an interesting model. Think about creating ecosystems. Short, diverse supply chains are inherently resilient. So think in terms of longer term partnerships as well as, just the kind of cheapest means of procuring something. We've spoken briefly about social responsibility strategy and also about incentivizing ethical behavior. So this is really interesting. It's worth making an assessment of, do your financial incentives undermine your organizational values in any way? Do any bonus schemes that you use kind of consider customer or employee satisfaction as well as performance? There's a lot of guidance out there on developing these ethical incentives. So in terms of measuring ethical performance, you've probably heard of the balanced scorecard. Many organizations will already be using this. I'm proposing an extended balanced scorecard. So this is something that we use at Youngo, and it's essentially an additional line that goes on top of the balanced scorecard, which considers the impact to the local community and to the, the broader sort of customer community that we're serving. Some metrics that you can use to sort of measure your ethical performance within your workforce. So probably familiar with the Net Promoter Score. The ENPS is similar. It's a measure of employee engagement. It can be done very quickly. Also look at sort of existing statistics that you might have around employee turnover. Is it too high? Is it too low? Sometimes that can also be a sign of, a sort of suppressive culture if your employee turnover is very low. Look at your employee relations, case management. Are you getting more grievances or less? Also, the perceived environment is really interesting. So on the next one here, net ethical culture. this is a really, really interesting metric, which does consider the perceived environment. So the environment as it's perceived by staff, but also by managers, because quite often they're very different perceptions. So the Net Ethical Culture Score, it was developed by an organisation called the Good Corporation. It's worth reading their report. It's a really, really interesting metric to use. Measure your organisational capability, measure the lessons learned. You know, a lot of companies say they do this, but are they really doing it? You know, are you really tracking? You know, it's almost like near misses in health and safety, but more generally, you know, lessons learned within your organisation. Your external metrics then. So again, it's not just about sales and revenue. It's about looking at customer satisfaction. It's about looking at social media engagement. This may be slightly alien for some manufacturers, but social media engagement is really important, particularly when you're engaging those sort of younger consumers who are obviously, you know, becoming more and more sort of important as time goes on. Look at your social impact. So this goes back again to looking at this kind of extended balanced scorecard, and look at your company reputation on things like Glassdoor, Google reviews. So these are just some ideas. There's obviously lots more information out there for you as well. So just to sort of end with, because I know this is a really kind of hot topic at the moment within manufacturing, and I'm sure it's something that you're going to be talking about a lot this week, Industry 4.0. So there are some, you know, fantastic benefits to Industry 4.0, the obvious stuff of, you know, new markets and new products, but also, you know, the ethical advantages of investing in Industry 4.0, so improving your health and safety within your organization, some of the ecological benefits of adopting remote working practices, for example, energy efficiency savings. But on the flip side, as there has been throughout this presentation, there are some, you know, concerns, some ethical concerns associated with Industry 4.0, such as redundancies, workforce tracking, artificial intelligence. You know, there was an example, Amazon actually, they got in trouble a few years ago for tracking their workforce, you know, around the factory. So there are, again, usually some inadvertent ethical implications associated with anything new. And so really, I just want to leave you with a question of, you know, how are you approaching Industry 4.0? Are you applying an ethical lens? What does success look like to you? And I appreciate we've run over a couple of minutes, so, you know, maybe we don't have time, but please do get in touch. Please do share your stories. And if you're interested in becoming a sort of pilot organization for our code of ethics, we would very much love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Jessica, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Really, really challenging and progressive. Just the sort of thing we needed to kick off day 2 of Digital Manufacturing Week. So thank you very much indeed. As Jessica said, if you're keen to engage, learn more about this, I'm sure she'll be keen to speak to you. So I guess reach out on LinkedIn or visit the Yungo website to find out some more. Thanks very much, Jessica. The rest of today, we're focusing on Smart Factory, and my suggestion is that you return to the lobby area of the site, and from there you can navigate to whichever content or session you'd like to join, and go and visit all of the exhibitors. For keynote presentations within Digital Manufacturing Week, the next one is 5:30 today, and that's Amber Case, who is a cyborg anthropologist. And if, like me, you're not entirely sure what that is, join us again, 5:30, same place, for that presentation. I hope you have a terrific day. Thanks again, Jessica, and good luck, everybody. Have a lovely day.